Welcome to the Explainer. Okay, let's get right into it. When your cloud services need to talk to each other, how do you connect them? Do you send them down the public highway or through a private, super secure tunnel? It seems like a simple choice, but it has huge implications. Today, we're going to break it all down and make it really simple. So this is really the fundamental question, right? How do you let your systems communicate and do it securely? And listen, the answer isn't just a couple lines of code. No way! It's a big architectural decision, one that directly impacts your security, your budget, and honestly, the complexity of your whole network. All right, to make this super clear, we're going to use an analogy for this entire explainer. Just think of it like this: public streets versus private tunnels. Connecting your services using a public endpoint, that's like taking the city's public streets. Yeah, they're accessible to everyone, but using AWS PrivateLink, well, that's like building your very own private underground tunnel that goes straight to your destination. No traffic, no prying eyes. Okay, first up, let's take a little drive down the public route, what we're calling the public streets of AWS. You know, using public endpoints is kind of the default way a lot of services connect. But, and this is a big but, that public label can be a little bit misleading. Let's see why. Okay, so here's where things get really interesting. And honestly, this might surprise you. When you hear public endpoint, your brain probably jumps straight to the wild, open internet, right? You're picturing your data zipping across the globe. But is that really what's happening inside the AWS ecosystem? And here's the answer. This little quote from AWS reveals something fascinating. Even when you're using so-called public IPs, if the traffic is just going between two services inside AWS, it almost always stays on Amazon's own private global network. It's like a private highway system that only AWS traffic can use. So here's the catch, and it's a big one. The endpoints themselves, the on-ramps to this highway, are still publicly addressable from the internet. And that accessibility is exactly what creates a potential attack surface. So, if the public route is like a highway with public on-ramps, what's the other option? Well, it's time to go underground. Let's talk about building a dedicated private tunnel with AWS PrivateLink. The whole point of PrivateLink, its entire reason for being, is total and complete isolation. We're talking about a connection where your traffic never even gets close to an internet-accessible endpoint. It creates a truly private connection that is completely sealed inside the AWS network. This diagram really shows the big picture perfectly. Look, on one side, you've got the consumer. That's you, wanting to access a service. On the other side, you've got the provider, the one hosting that service. PrivateLink just acts as this incredibly secure, one-way bridge connecting the two. Okay, so how does this magic actually work? Let's dive in a little deeper. The service provider, right? They put their application behind something called a network load balancer. Then, PrivateLink does something really clever. It basically projects an endpoint. You can think of it as just a network interface with a private IP address directly into the consumer's own VPC. So the consumer's app just talks to this local private IP, and all that traffic gets securely tunneled over to the provider's service. Pretty cool, huh? So, when you put it all together, you get some really powerful benefits. First, by using only private IPs, you shrink your attack surface down to almost nothing. Second, you get to avoid all that complex routing, like VPC peering. This is a huge deal. It dramatically simplifies your network management, especially when you start to scale up. And finally, if you're in a hybrid world, it gives you a super secure bridge from your own on-prem data centers directly to services in the cloud. All right, we've seen both options now. Let's put them head to head. When do you take the public streets, and when is it really time to invest in building one of those private tunnels? Okay, this table lays out the core trade-offs really clearly. Let's walk through it. For security scope, with public access, you're thinking about network-level controls like security groups. But with PrivateLink, it's more granular, more service level. Now, exposure. This is the big one. With PrivateLink, your traffic never, ever touches the internet, period. With public access, there's always that potential exposure. And yeah, cost is always a factor. PrivateLink has hourly endpoint charges and data processing fees. The public route, believe it or not, can sometimes be cheaper because you might avoid fees from things like a NAT gateway. Finally, complexity. The public route is often simpler for basic setups, but PrivateLink, while it takes a bit more setup, can actually simplify your permissions and your network at scale. Okay, let's go back to those public streets for a second. We know the traffic mostly stays on the AWS backbone, which is great. But, and you knew there was a but, using public endpoints can create some really significant security potholes if you aren't paying close attention.
And what's the biggest risk? It boils down to one scary phrase: data exfiltration. Yep, that's stealing your data. Security researchers have proven that attackers can use a surprisingly simple misconfiguration in a VPC endpoint to create a secret backdoor and just walk out with your data.
So let's break down how this works, because it's absolutely crucial to understand. The default policy on a VPC endpoint, it's basically wide open. It permits all traffic from any principal. Now, imagine an attacker gets into one of your instances, even one in a so-called private network. They can then use their own AWS account credentials to funnel your data out through your endpoint to their S3 bucket. It becomes a command and control channel, a wide-open backdoor for data theft that completely bypasses your firewalls. This is exactly why, if you use the public route, locking down your endpoint policies isn't just a good idea, it is absolutely mandatory.
Okay, enough with the theory, let's make this practical. Let's look at some real-world scenarios to see how people are actually using these streets and tunnels out there. So when should you take the public street? Look, it's perfectly fine for a lot of use cases. If you've got a simpler app, if the data isn't super sensitive, or if cost is really your primary driver, then using a public endpoint can be a totally solid choice. But, and you know what I'm going to say, the main takeaway here is that you absolutely must lock down those endpoint policies to shut down that data exfiltration risk we just talked about. On the other hand, there are times when building that private tunnel with PrivateLink is basically non-negotiable. If you have high security needs, if you're in a regulated industry like finance or healthcare, you're connecting to a third-party SaaS provider, or you're building a shared services platform for your whole company. In those cases, the complete network isolation you get with PrivateLink is absolutely essential.
And here's a perfect example, a really common use case. Let's say you're using a third-party SaaS product for something like logging or data analytics. Instead of having to send all your sensitive data across public endpoints to them, the provider can just offer a private link connection. Suddenly, you're consuming their application securely and privately, almost as if it were running inside your very own network. Here's another really powerful pattern: building a shared services VPC. Honestly, this is how huge organizations manage to scale their infrastructure. You have one central account that provides common services, things like logging, authentication, you name it. And then hundreds, maybe thousands of other internal accounts can all connect to those services privately. This setup completely avoids the management nightmare of something like VPC peering. It's clean, it's secure, and it is just incredibly scalable. Okay, so we've explored the public streets and the private tunnels. Let's wrap this all up with a simple framework to help you choose your path. Whenever you have to make this choice, just run through these 3 simple steps. Step 1, assess security and compliance. Is complete network isolation a hard requirement for you? If the answer is yes, then your decision is made. You need PrivateLink. Step 2, evaluate your architecture. Are you the consumer connecting to a SaaS app, or are you the provider building a central service? Your role really helps determine the right pattern. And finally, step 3, consider cost and complexity. You just have to ask, do the security and simplicity benefits of PrivateLink justify those hourly endpoint costs and the initial setup? It's a trade-off.
So we'll leave you with this one final thought to chew on. Your application, your data, it's an incredibly valuable asset. Choosing how its different parts connect isn't just some minor technical detail. It is a fundamental piece of your overall security strategy. So the next time you're designing something, just take a step back and ask yourself, am I protecting my connections with the right kind of road?